She thought he was just another random guy she could humiliate in public. Armed with nothing but her pepper spray and unchecked rage, she targeted the wrong man. What Karen didn't realize until it was far too late was that the ordinary man in the MAGA hat was no less than a high-ranking youth general, and the fallout from her mistake would spiral faster than she could ever imagine. Karen arrived at the bustling community event brimming with her usual self-importance, already on edge and looking for something to critique. The fairgrounds were crowded, with families enjoying food trucks, live music, and craft booths scattered around. Karen's eyes constantly scanned the crowd, searching for anything that didn't align with her personal sense of acceptable behavior. It didn't take long for her attention to fixate on a man calmly strolling through the vendors wearing a bright red MAGA hat. To her, it was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. She saw not a person, but a symbol, an enemy, and that was enough. Instantly, a narrative formed in her mind. Karen didn't know the man, didn't know his story, didn't care to ask. She decided right then and there that he was a threat to the event, to the community, to everything she personally stood for. Her assumptions burned hotter than reason. Instead of minding her own business like everyone else, she veered sharply toward confrontation, fueled not by real concern, but by a manufactured moral high ground that she had appointed herself to defend. Muttering under her breath, Karen made a beeline for him, pushing through families and groups without so much as an "excuse me." People noticed her aggressive posture, her clenched fists, the determined look on her face. Some bystanders exchanged awkward glances, sensing the tension building. Most were smart enough to stay out of it, but a few curious eyes stayed locked on the brewing storm. Karen squared her shoulders and approached the man, standing directly in his path. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask any questions. She simply launched into a tirade, loudly accusing him of promoting hate and violence by wearing the hat. The man, startled but calm, tried to defuse the situation with a polite nod and an attempt to walk around her. But Karen wasn't interested in conversation. She was there for a spectacle, one where she could star as the heroic figure standing up against an imaginary villain. The man's calm demeanor only enraged her more. She interpreted his refusal to argue as arrogance, as further proof that he was guilty of all the things she had already decided he embodied. Her voice grew louder, drawing even more attention. A circle began to form as people pulled out their phones. Some spectators were genuinely concerned, others smelled the possibility of viral drama. Either way, Karen didn't notice or didn't care that her actions were becoming the true center of disturbance at the peaceful event. Instead of recognizing that she was escalating the situation, Karen doubled down. She jabbed her finger toward the man's chest, shouting inflammatory accusations. The man remained composed, refusing to engage beyond simple, courteous gestures. His refusal to react only poured gasoline on Karen's fire. She was determined to provoke a response, to get a reaction she could use to justify her outrage. She didn't care about facts. She didn't care about context. In her mind, she had already appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner. At this point, a few event staff members and local volunteers noticed the commotion. They began making their way through the crowd toward Karen and the man. Several onlookers tried to signal her to calm down, gesturing to the families nearby who were becoming visibly uncomfortable. Children clung to their parents as Karen's voice grew shriller. Still, she didn't relent. She felt invincible, armored by her own certainty that she was in the right. As more people turned their attention toward the scene, the atmosphere shifted. What started as casual curiosity turned into palpable tension. Some whispered among themselves, questioning why Karen was being so aggressive toward a man who hadn't said a single hostile word. Others began filming, sensing that this encounter wasn't going to end quietly. Karen, noticing the phones pointed in her direction, mistook it as validation. In her mind, the attention meant support, not scrutiny. She believed that once the video clip circulated, she would be praised for standing up against hate, without realizing that the audience wasn't capturing a hero, they were recording an out-of-control woman attacking a stranger for peacefully attending a public event. The man, still calm, still collected, stood his ground without a trace of fear or hostility. His quiet strength unsettled Karen, but she didn't have the emotional intelligence to recognize the discomfort as a sign to step back. Instead, she saw it as a personal challenge, a gauntlet thrown down that she needed to pick up to save face. By now, event security was getting closer, weaving through the crowd as the situation teetered on the brink of complete collapse. It was no longer just an embarrassing scene, it was becoming a public safety issue. But Karen had committed herself so deeply to the confrontation that there was no turning back, not without admitting she might be wrong. And that was something her ego simply couldn't tolerate. Everyone watching could feel it. Something bigger was about to happen. The tension was a taut wire stretched to its limit. Karen stood face to face with a man she thought she could intimidate, completely unaware that she had just picked the absolute worst target possible for her crusade. And the moment when she would realize the colossal mistake she had made was now only seconds away. The verbal assault wasn't enough for Karen. She wanted to make a statement, one that would leave no doubt about her perceived authority over the situation. As if the shouting and finger-jabbing weren't already shocking to those around her, Karen suddenly escalated things to an entirely different level. Without warning, and without any legitimate provocation, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small canister of pepper spray. The move was so abrupt that bystanders gasped in disbelief. This wasn't just a verbal argument anymore. Karen had crossed the line into physical assault. Her arm shot out, and before anyone could react, a stream of pepper spray hit the man squarely in the face. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Parents shielded their children. Vendors froze mid-transaction. Even those who had initially dismissed the confrontation as a typical public spat were now riveted by the sheer audacity of what had just unfolded. Karen, fueled by self-righteous fury, genuinely believed she had done something brave. She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the man to collapse in shame or retreat in fear. But the man didn't react the way Karen expected. Blinking through the burning sensation, he remained eerily composed. Instead of lashing out or causing a scene, he simply took a step back, breathing slowly and steadily. This unexpected calmness threw Karen off balance. She had expected a meltdown, a dramatic response that would validate her actions and paint her as the hero in this public showdown. Instead, the man's dignified restraint began to turn the crowd's sympathy squarely against her. Whispers started circulating. People who had been filming from the sidelines lowered their phones slightly, exchanging murmured disbelief. A few individuals edged closer, curious and concerned. Event security, who had been making their way toward the scene, picked up their pace. Their faces were grim, understanding instantly that what had started as a verbal confrontation had now turned into a serious liability for the event. Karen, oblivious to the shifting mood around her, continued to rant. She threw around buzzwords and accusations, trying to frame her assault as a necessary act of defense. But the more she spoke, the more unhinged she appeared. Her words slurred together in frantic desperation, not coherent arguments. It became obvious to everyone watching that the real aggressor wasn't the man in the MAGA hat, it was Karen. As security reached the scene, they moved swiftly to separate the two individuals, positioning themselves between Karen and the man. They asked her to step aside, but she resisted, insisting that she was the victim. Her voice rose again, high-pitched and trembling, but now it lacked the confident conviction it had earlier. For the first time since the confrontation began, Karen's bravado started to crack. Meanwhile, the man, now standing next to a security official, calmly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. In one smooth, deliberate motion, he produced a badge and an official identification card. The security guards exchanged quick, wide-eyed glances. Some in the crowd caught sight of the badge, and a new wave of murmuring swept through the spectators. This wasn't just any man. This wasn't just some random political supporter. He was someone important, someone official, and Karen had just assaulted him on camera, in front of dozens of witnesses. Karen's face paled as she caught snippets of the crowd's reactions. She tried to peek around the security guard blocking her view, her eyes darting nervously. She could sense something had changed, something huge, but her mind raced to piece it together. Why were the guards treating him with deference? Why were people whispering urgently to each other and pointing at her with looks of disbelief and condemnation? A sinking feeling formed in her stomach as one of the security staffers quietly radioed for law enforcement backup. They weren't treating her like a brave whistleblower. They were treating her like a suspect. Karen's hands, still clutching the pepper spray canister, began to tremble. For the first time, reality started to pierce through her haze of indignation. The event organizers quickly convened with security, trying to assess how best to manage the optics of the disaster unfolding in real time. Families were hurriedly moving away from the confrontation area. Some vendors began packing up early, not wanting to be associated with whatever legal storm was about to hit. Karen, meanwhile, shifted uneasily on her feet, suddenly aware that all the eyes that had once fed her sense of righteous indignation were now burning with judgment. Cameras were still rolling, but now they weren't documenting a heroic stand. They were capturing an act of unprovoked aggression against a decorated figure. As the security team gently guided the man toward a nearby first aid tent, giving him access to eye wash and medical assistance, Karen found herself surrounded. The questions started coming. Not friendly, not supportive, but firm and demanding. Who was she? Why had she attacked him? What justification did she think she had for using a weapon at a peaceful community event? Karen's answers stumbled out in broken fragments, none of them convincing. Her voice cracked under the weight of her own uncertainty. She had built her entire reaction on an assumption, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. In the space of just a few minutes, Karen had gone from self-proclaimed enforcer of public morality to the undeniable villain of the event. And the final blow, the revelation of the man's true rank and authority, was still to come. The moment the badge and official identification were revealed, the atmosphere around the confrontation shifted like a thunderclap. The crowd, who had initially been passive observers or quiet critics, instantly leaned in closer. There was no mistaking it. This man wasn't some random protester or political troublemaker. His credentials identified him as a decorated U.S. general, a high-ranking military officer with decades of service to the nation. The insignia on his identification wasn't just for show. It represented a lifetime of sacrifice, duty, and honor. And Karen had assaulted him in broad daylight. The security team, who had been handling the situation with cautious neutrality, immediately adjusted their demeanor. Their movements became more respectful, more protective toward the general. One guard discreetly called over the event manager, who rushed to the scene with a look of dawning horror spreading across his face. Whispered conversations buzzed urgently through earpieces. Event staff scrambled to figure out how to handle the situation before it spiraled any further out of control. Karen, standing a few feet away, watched the sudden deference given to the man she had just pepper sprayed. Confusion flickered across her face, quickly giving way to dread. Her earlier confidence, her assumption that she was confronting an ordinary, defenseless citizen, evaporated in an instant. The realization hit her like an icy wave. She hadn't just made a mistake, she had committed a serious offense against a federal official. The onlookers who had been filming sensed that they were witnessing something historic. Phones remained trained on Karen as her demeanor crumbled. She opened her mouth to protest, to explain, to deny, but no words came. The silence from the crowd was louder than any accusation. Their faces said it all: judgment, disbelief, disgust. She was no longer the self-styled heroine standing up against imagined injustice. She was the villain of her own story, caught red-handed before a growing audience. Meanwhile, the general, composed and dignified, despite the stinging pain in his eyes, addressed the security team with calm authority. He insisted that law enforcement be brought in immediately, not out of anger, but out of a clear, unwavering demand for accountability. Assaulting a private citizen would have been bad enough, Assaulting a member of the U.S. military, especially one still recognized in active advisory roles, elevated the situation into a federal matter. Karen's legs trembled under her. She swayed slightly, as if the weight of what she had done was physically too much to bear. Her eyes darted around the crowd, looking for any trace of sympathy or support, but found none. She was alone. Her earlier shouting, her aggressive stance, her weaponizing of fear and assumptions, all of it now stood exposed in the harsh light of truth. Someone from the event staff approached Karen and attempted to usher her to the side, away from the center of attention, but she resisted at first, mumbling weak excuses about self-defense and feeling threatened. Yet her words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. No one believed her anymore. The video footage, the eyewitnesses, the blatant overreaction, it all painted a picture that even the best lawyer would struggle to reframe. As a local police unit arrived on the scene, the general gave his statement with crisp, precise details, recounting the events without embellishment or emotion. His composure contrasted starkly with Karen's unraveling nerves. She was questioned next, but her answers were fragmented, inconsistent, and increasingly panicked. The officers took their time, documenting every detail, making sure that this situation was handled with the gravity it deserved. The questions were relentless. Did she realize who she was confronting? What had provoked her to use pepper spray without any physical threat presented? Why hadn't she contacted security instead of taking matters into her own hands? Every answer Karen gave only seemed to dig her hole deeper. She looked smaller and smaller with each passing minute, dwarfed not just by the legal consequences looming ahead, but by the sheer enormity of her mistake. Word traveled fast. Within an hour, local news crews had set up at the edges of the event, catching whispers of a major incident involving a general and an aggressive civilian. Clips from bystanders' phones had already begun circulating on social media, complete with captions that left no room for sympathy toward Karen. Entitled Woman Assaults War Hero and Karen Attacks U.S. General at Community Event trended within minutes. Karen's face, red and tear-streaked, was plastered across every platform imaginable. There was no spinning the narrative in her favor. No clever justification, no public relations miracle could erase the video evidence or the testimony of dozens of witnesses. Her name, her actions, her meltdown, they were now part of a national conversation about entitlement, assumptions, and consequences. The final blow came when the general, in his quiet and measured voice, stated to the police that he would be pressing charges, not out of vengeance, but to set an example. No one, regardless of their political views, their emotional state, or their ignorance, had the right to physically assault another person, especially not a servant of the country who had dedicated his life to protecting freedoms that Karen had so recklessly trampled. Karen's knees buckled slightly as she heard the words. Pressing charges. Federal offense. Assaulting a decorated officer. There was no walking away from this. No apology grand enough to undo the damage. She wasn't just facing public humiliation, she was facing real, tangible legal consequences that would follow her long after the crowd had dispersed and the cameras were turned off. And deep down, even through her panic and disbelief, Karen knew. She had no one to blame but herself. The fallout from Karen's reckless decision unfolded at a pace she never anticipated. Mere minutes after the police placed her under temporary detainment for questioning, the story had already begun to gain traction beyond the local event. Bystanders uploaded videos across every major platform: Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, each clip painting the same damning picture. Within an hour, Karen's actions weren't just a local scandal. They had erupted into a full-blown national spectacle. The consequences came rushing in all at once. The event organizers, desperate to distance themselves from the controversy, issued a public statement condemning violence of any kind and announcing Karen's permanent ban from all future gatherings. They also reassured the public that full cooperation would be provided to law enforcement, hinting that the assault on a military officer carried especially serious implications. No matter what excuse Karen might try to conjure later, the event's official narrative had already locked her into the role of the aggressor. Meanwhile, the general's name quickly surfaced in the media reports. His reputation was sterling, a respected veteran, an advisor on national security, and a public figure known for his nonpartisan service to the country. Headlines weren't kind to Karen. They emphasized the disparity between her petty, impulsive aggression and the towering stature of the man she had assaulted. It wasn't simply an incident anymore, it was symbolic. A reckless, entitled civilian physically attacking the embodiment of national honor and sacrifice. Karen, panicking as she was escorted away from the crowd, began trying to backtrack. She babbled to the officers, insisting she hadn't known who he was, that it was a misunderstanding, that she felt unsafe and threatened by his presence. But the more she talked, the worse she sounded. The officers, hardened by experience, remained stone-faced. They knew the law didn't care about the identity of a person when it came to assault, but attacking a federal figure layered a whole new level of gravity onto her already crumbling defense. Her personal information wasn't hard to find once her face went viral. Internet sleuths, fueled by outrage and the scent of scandal, uncovered her social media profiles, past public outbursts, and even minor run-ins with community organizations. Every controversial comment she had ever posted was dug up and amplified. Narratives were spun not by Karen, but by the unstoppable force of public opinion. She had become the villain in a story much bigger than herself, and there was no path left to frame herself as a victim. Karen's employer, upon catching wind of the situation, immediately suspended her pending an internal review. Corporate America, sensitive to any hint of bad PR, couldn't afford to be seen associated with someone now infamous for violence against a national hero. Karen received a terse email informing her that a formal investigation into her recent conduct was underway. While no final decision had been made yet, anyone with common sense could see where this was headed. Neighbors, once polite if distant, now stared coldly when passing Karen's home. Some shook their heads openly. A few even began circulating a petition to bar her from participating in local community events or homeowners association meetings, citing concerns over her behavior and temperament. Karen wasn't just facing charges, she was being socially exiled. As the legal machinery kicked into gear, Karen's lawyer gave her no illusions. Facing charges of assault, potential civil suits, and possible federal-level consequences if the general pursued them, her best hope would be to show extreme remorse, seek a plea deal, and pray for leniency. But even if the criminal penalties could somehow be minimized, the damage to her public reputation, career, and personal life was already permanent. Her face was now a meme, a symbol of entitlement and reckless aggression, repeated endlessly across social media platforms with captions that left no ambiguity about how she was perceived. Behind the scenes, political figures and media outlets picked up the story, framing it within broader cultural battles. Commentators debated the meaning of respect, patriotism, and the dangers of unchecked outrage. Every news cycle gave Karen's humiliation a fresh life. Even if she issued a public apology, a possibility her lawyer heavily advised, there was no guarantee the public would accept it. Most likely, it would only fuel another round of mockery and backlash. Karen's personal relationships also suffered instant, irreversible strain. Friends she had counted on for support suddenly grew distant. Family members expressed their disappointment in hushed, painful conversations. Trust, once casually given, had now been shattered. It wasn't simply that Karen had made a mistake, it was that she had revealed a side of herself that many close to her now found impossible to ignore. By the end of that chaotic first day, Karen found herself sitting alone in her home, curtains drawn, phone buzzing nonstop with angry messages, reporters' inquiries, and inevitable threats. Her world had shrunk from a vibrant community and bustling social life to a claustrophobic box of shame, fear, and regret. No matter how she tried to rationalize it, she could not escape the simple, brutal truth. Her own actions had led her here. And the worst part? This was only the beginning. The legal battles, the financial penalties, the professional exile, the endless online infamy, all of it was still ahead. Karen's life had unraveled faster than she ever could have imagined, and she had no one to blame but herself. As the weeks turned into months, Karen's downfall solidified into something bigger than a momentary scandal. It became a living, breathing cautionary tale. Every few weeks, another meme would surface, another viral post would circulate, keeping her humiliation fresh in the public consciousness. Her name became synonymous with rash judgment and the devastating consequences of unchecked entitlement. News outlets eventually moved on to other stories, but the internet never forgets. Clips of the incident were preserved on countless servers, archived in reaction videos, referenced in opinion pieces about civility and respect. No matter how deeply Karen tried to retreat into obscurity, the digital footprint she left behind ensured her moment of disgrace lived on. She was no longer just an individual who made a terrible mistake. She was a symbol in cultural conversations about arrogance, assumption, and the fragility of reputations. For Karen, each day became a painful exercise in isolation and reflection. The people who had once been part of her social circle were gone. The invitations to neighborhood gatherings, casual lunches, and weekend get-togethers vanished completely. Even family interactions were strained, filled with awkward silences and half-hearted attempts to steer conversations away from the incident. Holidays became solitary affairs. Professional opportunities dried up too. No serious employer wanted to risk the PR disaster that might follow her name. More devastating than the social exile, however, was the internal reckoning Karen faced. Stripped of the protective delusions she once hid behind, she had no choice but to examine the arrogance that had brought her to this point. For the first time, she was forced to confront the deep bias, the impulse to assume the worst in others, and the sense of superiority that had blinded her to the humanity of the man she attacked. Realizing these flaws didn't absolve her past actions, it magnified the shame she felt. Meanwhile, the U.S. General continued to live with the grace and dignity he had displayed that day. Interviews and features portrayed him as the epitome of strength through restraint. He became a celebrated figure not just for his military service, but for his example of patience and principle in the face of blatant provocation. His story inspired countless discussions about true leadership, the meaning of service, and the importance of humility, qualities Karen had so publicly lacked. His composure became the ultimate counterpoint to Karen's impulsiveness. Where she had acted with immediate violence, he had chosen discipline. Where she had lashed out from a place of fear and prejudice, he had responded with calm authority. The juxtaposition was stark and instructive, a study in the immense difference between imagined power and true strength. Educational programs even began referencing the incident as a case study. Diversity and inclusion seminars, security training sessions, even conflict de-escalation workshops used it as a real-world example of how assumptions could spiral into disaster, and how self-control could defuse even the most inflammatory situations. Karen's reckless moment thus inadvertently served to educate thousands, perhaps even millions, about the dangers of entitlement and the virtues of restraint. Karen's attempts to rebuild her life were slow and arduous. Legal fees mounted, settlements were negotiated, and public apologies, drafted with the help of expensive crisis PR teams, fell mostly on deaf ears. She could apologize all she wanted, but the public had already rendered its judgment. It was a brutal, ongoing lesson. Reputations take years to build and seconds to destroy. Somewhere deep down, Karen knew she would never completely escape the shadow of that day. Every time she filled out a job application, every time she met someone new and saw that flicker of recognition in their eyes, she was reminded she had to carry the weight of her actions into every future relationship, every professional opportunity, every social interaction. Redemption was possible, but it would be a lifelong climb, and even then, true forgiveness might remain forever out of reach. As for the broader world, Karen's story settled into a permanent place in the digital folklore of modern America. It wasn't just about her pepper spraying a man because of a hat. It was about the dangers of acting without thinking, judging without knowing, and letting fear rule over reason. It was about how a moment of assumed superiority could be completely shattered by the quiet revelation of truth. In the end, Karen didn't just teach herself a painful lesson, she taught a nation one. Her mistake became an enduring reminder that appearances can deceive, that quick judgments often backfire, and that respect must be afforded before assumptions are made. Her story was burned into memory, not because she had set out to make a statement, but because her failure illuminated a deeper truth about society and about the high cost of forgetting humility. If you enjoyed this wild twist of fate, don't forget to subscribe to expect stories for more unbelievable real-life showdowns.